Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 13, Full Throttle Brawl. Ha! The boy with the staff yelled as he spun on one knee and attempted to sweep his opponent's legs out from under them, but she jumped over the staff and swung her blade over her head before swinging it down towards the boy. He kicked his leg up off the ground and jumped back before rolling along the floor and jumped back to his feet. The girl landed on her feet and placed a hand on her broadsword to steady her stance before she activated her aura and used the electric dust in her hilt to power her blade. She charged forward and started swiftly waving her blade with precise strikes as it scraped against the boy's brown staff and sent sparks over their handles. She kicked him and he stumbled back as she spun on her feet and returned to her stance with her blade staying beside her head. He looked up and furrowed his eyes before he started to twirl his staff in his hands at blinding speed before both sides collapsed inwards to the middle. He charged and jumped before thrusting his weapon forward and one side of the staff extending out at blinding speeds and catching the girl by surprise before retracting back to the center. She stumbled back as he continued charging forward and pressed forward with his staff extended back and forth against her blade. She struggled to block its attacks as he continued forward. He extended his staff on both sides, and started spinning it in his hands before jumping up and planning to strike her from overhead. But the girl used her blades to parry and deflect the staff before sending her aura through her blade again and activating the fire dust in her hilt. Her sword was engulfed in flames, and she slammed it into his chest as it exploded and sent him flying back. Ah! The boy landed on the ground and groaned painfully as the girl stood back up and held her blade at her side before the fight was done. The lights turned back on over the entire amphitheater as Glinda walked over the lower dueling stage. As the competitors stood back up and at her sides, she nodded. "Excellent display, students. Though it was a bit too flashy compared to actual combat, you both showed subpar maneuverability and combat skill. Although you both have some rough edge to work out for your first time dueling at the school, it was a strong effort." The two students nodded with their heads, and a few claps came from the viewing stands over them. The holographic screens over the stage showed the still pictures of the two students that had finished fighting, and a bar beneath them that pictured the remaining aura. Ah! Ruby squealed with an exuberant joy before watching the fight between the other students play out. She was almost leaning out of the side of the spectator stands as she was jumping in place, watching people pull out their best fighting moves, using their customized weapons to the fullest, and utilizing dust rounds or semblances. It was official. This was her favorite new class ever. And she even got to change out of her stuffy clothes and dressed in her fighting outfit. This was so much fun. She bounced on her feet with her eyes sparkling bright. "I knew it! See, Yang, I told you she had an electric attachment on her fire sword. So cool!" She immediately felt a tug on her hood that pulled her back into her seat beside Pyrrha and Yang. Her older sister nodded. "Yeah, Ruby, I get it. And if you keep jumping like that, then everyone else is going to realize it when you fall over and slam your face into the ground. Oh, come on, I'll be careful." "Yes, but even when you're careful, you have a tendency to screw things up," Weiss said from one row back, looking down at her partner and taking the chance to poke fun at her idea of being careful. Ruby looked back at the white-haired Harris. "Name one time I wasn't careful." They watched as Weiss started counting off her fingers. "Knocking over my dust when we arrived at Beacon, sneezing with my dust to create an explosion, the mess when you were showing off Crescent Rose." Okay, Ruby interrupted before turning back around and crossing her arms with a stat pout. "I said just one." John was confused and asked Naruto, sporting his new white bandana besides him. "What happened with Crescent Rose?" "She wanted to show off her skills, but she accidentally fired into a pack of Beowulfs and got surrounded by them until me and Kiba came to help." "Oh." John sat back on his butt before shaking his head. "That sucks." "It did." "Yep. Absolutely. Would you guys stop picking on me? It's mean," Ruby said as her shoulders slumped and she started sulking after being told off by Naruto, Kiba, and Weiss in succession. Yang just patted her little sister's back. There. Someday your screw-up will be something we can all laugh about in the future. That's just not today." Ruby's head sunk even further until her forehead touched her knees. Pyrrha looked up at the blonde sister. Is she going to be okay?" Yang waved off her concern. "Oh yeah, she'll be fine. Just wait until the next match starts and she'll be back to her jumpy little self in no time." Blake mused. "Sounds like you're accustomed to her sulking." Oh yeah, Uncle Crow telling her she fights like a 5-year-old, waving their arms back and forth. Dad telling her she's grounded for staying out all night waiting for a new game. This happens a lot. Yang sat back smugly and wiped her knuckles on her jacket. Usually I just cook up a batch of cookies and bam, she's happy again. Ruby interjected from where she rested, her head on her knees. Your cookies are bland. Okay, that hurt. Alright everyone, we will be moving on to the next round of sparring, Glinda announced as she brought up a function on her scroll that fed directly into the screen overhead. 2 lists of names started to spin and randomly started highlighting a set of names with each spin. Glinda looked up at the students. Now remember, these matches will continue until one combatant admits defeat or the gauge deeps too far into the red. Until then, keep your guard and use your skills to the fullest. The next round of sparring shall be between 2 names and pictures finally appeared on both screens. Mr. Naruto Uzumaki and Miss Yang Xiaolong, please come down to the sparring stand and woohoo! Naruto jumped out of his seat with an eager air around him and a big grin on his face. He started pumping his fist. Finally, something fun! He started running down the bleachers while his friend slid out of the way of his eager charge as he prepared to jump over the edge. Mr. Uzumaki! Naruto stopped and looked down to see Glinda giving him a dry stare from the edge. She fixed her glasses. I understand you're eager to get some exercise, but may I suggest you take the stairs behind you before you start jumping over the sides? Naruto looked back to see there was an opening in the seats with stairs leading down to the lower level. Some of the students started laughing at the embarrassing scene as Naruto nervously laughed with a red hue on his cheeks. Alright, my bad. Yes, ma'am. Naruto ran down the stairs while the rest of his friends looked over at Yang as she sat up and rolled her shoulders. Well, I guess it's about time I got out there and showed these guys how to really fight. Ruby looked up at her big sister. Good luck, Yang. Be careful. Oh, come on, Ruby. Yang cracked her knuckles and smirked. We both know I'm not the one you should be worried about. She started strolling forward and headed down the stairs to her duel. Kiba looked away and shook his head. That woman terrifies me. John laughed nervously. I guess that's just a normal reaction. Ruby looked back at all of them. Hey, and what's so scary about Yang, huh? I like her, Nora said as she jumped down to sit beside Ruby before smiling at the young girl. She's spunky, but Naruto's pretty spunky too. I mean, not a lot of guys throw themselves up in the air to tackle Nevermore into an alpha wolf. Ruby blinked in surprise before she looked forwards again. Huh, good point. Plus, I bet he's got some kind of super weapon hidden beneath the bandana, Nora speculated with the red and black-haired girl. Like a bazooka? Ruby eyes sparkled. Or a shotgun? Or an anti-tank rifle? Or an anti-air missile? It's a rag on his head. Weiss finally had to put an end to the madness as she looked at the 2 lunatics critically. There's not much he can hide under there. She's right, Nora, Ren said from behind them as he shook his head. I doubt Naruto is hiding a military arsenal in the few inches of space underneath that cloth. Pooh, you guys have no fun. And Nara crossed her arms and pouted at being told off. Ruby did the same thing. Yeah, I mean, if you guys can't even enjoy a sparring class, then what's the point? Well, Tenten looked down at the 2 pouting girls to try and appease them. How do you think we should try and enjoy it? They tilted their heads to try and think of the best way to have fun while the 2 blondes prepared for battle. Oh, they all looked over at John before he suggested, why don't we take bets or something? Ruby and Nora pointed at him and smiled. Yeah! Ruby jumped out of her seats. We'll make bets on who's gonna win. My desserts on Yang. My pancakes on the guy with the infinite space bandana. Ren just shook his head. I'm certain he doesn't have an infinite space under his bandana. Kiba grinned and sat up. Hey, that actually sounds like fun. My bet's on Naruto. Ruby pointed at him. Then you have to give up your dinner or something. What? Why? Because I'm giving up my cookies. It's the least you guys can do. Ruby's face darkened as she spoke with as much of a serious tone as the silly girl could muster. When you bet your cookies, then you're no longer playing a silly game. Kiba rolled his eyes. Fine, whatever. I bet a dinner on Naruto. Nora looked up at her partner. Ren, you too, come on. Oh, well, alright then. I suppose since I've seen Naruto's fighting capability in action while against the Deathstalker, then I shall wager on him. She nodded before she looked over at Pyrrha expectantly. Pyrrha felt rather put on the spot. Oh, shouldn't we just watch the display and hope for the best? Ruby shook her head. No. Well, alright then. Pyrrha felt nervous under the young girl's serious stare before finally folding. I suppose I'll place a bet on Yang, considering she proved quite essential in the fight against the Grim. Yay! Yang Ruby looked at the remainder of their little group and silently pleaded with her big silver eyes for an answer. Tenten raised her hand. Well, he's my team leader, so I'm putting my bet on Naruto. Sasuke nodded. Same. Blake rested her hand on her lap, not entirely interested in the idea of betting, but also savvy enough to realize her leader wasn't going to let her abstain from it. She shrugged. Well, she's my partner. Ruby smiled before looking over at her partner. Weiss? Weiss flicked her hair. We're supposed to be taking this time of observing and criticizing the abilities of fellow hunters. Taking bets and gambling is the exact opposite of the protective nature they're trying to. Ruby interrupted. Okay, you're not playing. Who else? Hey, hold on! Weiss interjected with a little whine, getting the rest of the group to look over at her while she suddenly felt very uncomfortable and her ears started to heat up. She crossed her arms and looked away. Yang! Ruby smiled at her partner before looking around. That only leaves. Nora and Ruby looked over at John at the same time as the scruffy blonde suddenly felt very afraid and nervous. He tried to back away. Oh no. Before John could flee to safety, Ruby appeared beside him using her speed and held his shoulders in place. She asked eagerly, John, you're gonna bet that Yang's gonna win, right? No, Naruto. It's got to be Naruto, right? Nora said before waving her hand in front of his face. The bandana! The bandana! And John shook his arms and head. Please don't make me choose. John, you're my friend, Ruby pleaded. As such, shouldn't you support your friend and cheer for her sister? John thought for a moment as a chain of thought started to form. Wait, by that logic, shouldn't I be cheering for Naruto considering I met him first? Ruby waved his logic off. Semantics. Weiss shook her head. Do you even know what that means? Just bet on Yang, Naruto, Yang, Naruto, Yang, Naruto, Yang, Naruto. Stop! John's eyes were swirling around, and the others couldn't help but pity the poor guy for getting caught between the two girls and their weird competitive nature. He held his hands and moaned, Just give me a second to think. Ruby whispered into his ears, Yang! Yang, I picked Yang. I bet on Yang. Ruby smiled and Nora pouted before John looked at them both. Please, just stop whispering evil in my ears. Ruby and Naruto left to go sit in their seats before Ren and Pyrrha sat beside John and patted his back sympathetically. Kiba shook his head. Okay, well now we know those two can break just about anyone if they try. Look! They all looked down to see Yang and Naruto walk out of the separate entrances from the dressing rooms with their weapons on standby. Naruto fixed the last strap holding his sword to his side, while Yang looked at her gauntlets with a confident smile. They stood apart from each other at the end of the stage, and Glinda walked over to stand between them. Her heels were clicked together as she started checking equipment with her scroll. She stepped back to check the cameras before looking at her two students. I'll be done in a moment. You can chat if you want. Just be ready when I say go. Got it. Can do. Glinda stepped away and Yang and Naruto looked at each other with smirks. Naruto intertwined his fingers and cracked his knuckles. Finally, I get to fight again. I haven't done anything fun since the initiation test. Just been reading and taking notes. I think we both know you mean drawing doodles and sleeping in class. Yang responded flippantly as she started rolling her shoulders. She grinned again. But I see what you're talking about. Nice to get some exercise and get the blood pumping. Exactly. Naruto squatted down and stretched out his right leg. He did it with the other leg. Well, whatever. I can't make up for this whole... I can't make up for this whole schoolwork. I'll definitely make up for it with killing Grim. Well, don't get too excited. Yang placed a hand on her chest and faked a more girly voice. Don't forget you're just fighting little old me. Crack. She must have been planning to use that voice as a joke because the way she popped the crick in her neck was just perfect for ruining the tension. Naruto flinched a little before laughing nervously. Right. And is that little old you the same one that punched an alpha wolf in the face or not? You'll just have to wait and find out. A cheeky smile came across her face as she spotted the weapons on his back and decided to poke the Ursa. We'll have to see if you can actually use those multiple swords in a fight, huh? Naruto's smile flattened out, and he slightly glared at her. I'm sorry, weren't you there when I fended off a Deathstalker with my swords, all 11, at the same time? Or how about when I saved all your butts by skewering those two big Grim together? Yang waved them off. Oh, Ruby finished them off, and we both know that. Naruto nodded and said, okay, yeah, she totally did, but I pinned them together. Plus, I saved her butt when she fell off the side, and I wouldn't ever stop thanking you for doing that, Yang said before she shrugged her shoulders. It's not gonna stop me from kicking your butt across the whole stage. And the same to you. The real-time images of the stage started playing on her scroll, and Glinda walked back over the student's side. She looked between them. Are you both ready? They both took a step back without needing to respond verbally. Naruto reached back and pulled the stormer off his back, gripping his main blade tightly and spinning around his hand for a stylish flare. Yang bounced on her feet a few times before whipping her arms down and letting Ember Silica mechanically click into position along her forearms. Yang got into her boxing stance as Naruto placed a foot back and got into a comfortable fighting stance. Glinda stepped back until she was far enough where she wouldn't interfere with the spar. Ready? Begin! Naruto dashed forward and swung his sword in a flurry of strikes at Yang as she used the back of her gauntlets to block. As she stepped back with each strike, she ignored the sparks that bounced off the conflicting metals as Naruto pushed forward with a firm hand. Yang couldn't find an opening as she made one in the form of a quick left jab that forced Naruto to dodge to her side to avoid injury. She smiled triumphantly as she got him right where she wanted him to be. She pulled her right fist back and cocked her gauntlet as she threw a right hook with the addition of a blast of fire straight at his face. Naruto's eyes widened and he nearly cursed as he kicked off his planted foot and spun in the air just in time to barely avoid the blast. He landed in a crouch before jumping back to his feet and spinning out with his blade extended to attack her. Yang raised her face up and blocked the blade before she quickly readjusted for follow-up that she blocked with her other hand. He gripped his sword with both hands and continued pressing forward as Yang blocked the back of her left, then right, then left again. She blocked once more before spinning along with the attack and taking a step in to strike the Whiskered Man in the face with her elbow. He just barely leaned back before she followed through and threw jabs and crosses at his head. Naruto could feel the pressure behind each of their fists and made a mental note that by no circumstances should he be on the receiving end of those knuckles. One cross was especially close in clocking the bandana wearing blonde out, but he took that chance and grabbed Yang from around the wrist. He harshly pulled her forward and up to get her out of her stance before he jumped and wrapped his legs along her arm and around her collar before flipping and sending her flying across the stage. Yang let out a little yelp as she was sent packing after Naruto's elaborate move and had succeeded in getting her off the ground. Naruto landed in a crouch as Yang got her bearings and got to her feet on the ground before sliding across the stage. Yang looked up and Naruto looked over his shoulders before the two blondes locked eyes and smirked. That was the end of testing the water. Now the fun could begin. Yang pumped her arms up before throwing them back and using a blast from her gauntlets to launch her across the stage and at her opponent at blistering speeds. Naruto reacted just in time and pulled out one of his short blades to accompany his free left hand and used it to parry the punch from the boisterous blonde and her fiery fist. Yang landed back on her feet and spun wildly to land a hammered fist on him, but he countered with Stormer and knocked it back. He aimed the bottom of the short blade's hilt at her head and squeezed the trigger to fire around a concussive and arrows at her. She whipped her head to the side as the arrows whizzed by her face and attempted to land a punch on his chin, but he spun on his feet and separated away from her before she could land a hit on each other. Okay, usually by this point she had sent her enemies flying with a fresh red mark on their face, and fear settled nicely into their heads, and yet she hadn't so much as landed a hit on Naruto yet. She hadn't been able to gauge the full extent of his strength yet, but she was certain he was a slippery guy for sure. Naruto stopped the move away from the strong boxer and pulled two more short blades out to hold between his knuckles for a total of 4 blades at once. He charged forward and started swinging and swinging at the beautiful blonde in an attempt to finally land a hit, but Yang was still able to keep up her guard. The blades and gauntlets continued to scrap against each other with the sound of clashing metal and the momentary spray of sparks between them. Naruto to use the shorter blades in his left hand to attack and cut her, but Yang proved just how quickly she was by blocking and pushing them back at the same rate. And while she blocked with her right, she tried to return the hits with her left, but Naruto parried and redirected her fist with Stormer, using the blade's base to protect him despite its length. With both fighters favoring their right side to defend and their left side to attack, the two blondes were stuck in a close combat brawl they couldn't escape. When Naruto tried tried to kick it near her, Yang would quickly counter by raising her leg up and stopping him. Yang finally had enough of it and yelled loudly before throwing a strong right hook to knock Naruto back, but he pushed her fist aside and got in close before placing his palm and three hilts against her back to fire his arrows. Yang took the opening of his attack to finally hit back. She fired a round from her gauntlets that quickly spun her around and landed an elbow in Naruto's abdomen as her quick move forced his attack to miss and only hit her shoulder. Naruto was pushed back and slid on the floor, and Yang was harshly smacked into the ground. The two blondes groaned as their mutual attacks had both landed and had finally started showing results from their fight. Woo! And Nora cheered excitedly as she was enjoying every second of the fast-paced fighting. She roared, "Bust some head, Naruto!" Ruby countered, "Go, Yang, kick his fanny!" Yang is way tougher than I thought she was. Keep amused as he was focused on the fight with all of his attention. I mean, I knew she was tough, but damn. Blake nodded. They're both very strong. Yang could hold her own against the group of Ursai like they were nothing, but Naruto was very adept and quick in the fight with the Grim. I can't tell who will win. I really hope I don't fight one of them," John said as his leg continued to bounce with the mix of excitement and anxiousness he was feeling. "Well, they finally started landing hits on each other, so that means the fight is progressing," Ren said before he cupped his chin. Although Yang's attack was propelled by her gauntlets, so her already impressive strike power was increased quite a bit, and she's also very tough, so Naruto's arrows will not deter her for long, even more so considering she was able to avoid the full brunt of their damage. What do you think, Pyrrha? He waited in an answer but did not get one from the most gifted member of their team as both he and John looked over at her. Pyrrha's attention had drifted upwards to look at the screens that displayed the two fighters' aura gauge to determine their standing in the fight. After being knocked down by the arrows, Yang's bar had only gone down by a 9th or 10th of its total length, barely a hindrance due to her aura shielding her, while Naruto's had gone down by a 5th after she had dug her elbows under his ribs like that. Strangely enough, Pyrrha could not sense Naruto's aura being used to shield and protect him from the fight, like most of other students did, but that was not the strangest part. His bar was slowly but steadily filling up the blank parts of the bar until only a 9th of it was missing instead of a 5th. She had never seen something like that before. She had met and known many fighters who reserved their aura sparingly, and even some that could focus a large amount of it to heal themselves like John, but not as fast as this. How big was Naruto's aura? Did it have something to do with his semblance? Naruto was finally able to stand back up, but hissed when he felt the spike of pain from his ribs. He looked over to see Yang rubbing her head and gently rolling her shoulder to see that while her left side hurt, it thankfully wasn't dislocated. She decided to take the chance and jumped to her feet and cocked her fist to her side, despite deciding to take the chance her side before she started throwing her fist and firing round after round at her opponent. Naruto dashed across the stage as Yang's attack blew up the ground chasing after him. Naruto let his motor and reflexes take over as he focused on pulling more of his blades out and feeding an iron wire through their hooks. Yang didn't appreciate the sight of her attacks being ignored and launched herself off her feet again and at Naruto. Naruto looked up and finished tying his blades together before flipping backwards and evading the kick Yang tried to land on him. Naruto crouched down and tightened the wire so all 10 of the Gatling blades were along the back of his arms, and Stormer was held tightly in his right. He jumped forward and swiped at Yang as she stepped back and got back into her boxing stance. He stepped forward to thrust his sword at her, and Yang pushed it aside with the palm of her hand. He used the push to step in and started spinning at her with his blade standing out to hit her. Naruto kept spinning around and around as Yang had to block and keep her distance from the relentless barrage of attacks that swarmed her. Yang kept blocking to the best of her ability until Naruto came to an abrupt stop and aimed the bottom of an 11 blades at her before tightening the wires, firing a barrage of arrows and blasting her away. He didn't stop there as he slid to his knees and pulled the wire over his head before aiming his arrows and fired them all at Yang. Yang barely had a chance to defend as she decided to cover her face and arms while the rest of her body was was bombarded with the staggering force of the arrows. She fell to her knee and gritted her teeth while his attacks kept coming and coming until they suddenly stopped. She looked up just in time to see Naruto sprinting towards her for the chance to attack. Yang jumped up to her feet and swung up at his head just as he kneeled and slid under her fist. He pulled her leg out from under her and screwed up her footing before swiping up and hitting her with the full extent of all 11 of his blades. Yang was sent spinning and flying into the air before the powerful strike had finally landed across her face. Yang bounced off the ground several times as Naruto jumped up to his side and stayed in his fighting stance as Yang groaned and struggled to her feet. She shook her head with bleary eyes before raising her fist in her fighting stance. Naruto kept his narrowed eyes one the blonde before he noticed something and grinned. He started raising his eyebrows at her. Looks like you'll want to step up your game if you want to keep your head or hair. Yang matched his cheeky grin. Oh, and what is that supposed to? And then it happened. It slowly floated from over her head and into her sights, where everything else constricted and focused solely on that entity. And she brought her hands tightly to carefully catch and cup it in her palms. A few strands of blonde hair. Her blonde hair. Blake blinked in shock while Ruby cowered in her seat with wide, terrified eyes. She was shaking. Oh no. The others saw the youngest girl's strange behavior, while Yang just seemed to freeze in place as Naruto was happy at his triumph at knocking a good chunk of her aura meter down. Weiss looked down at her partner. What is it? You should have a little more faith in your sister than just that. Ruby turned around and looked up at her partner with a whimpering and almost pathetic look before she turned around and started climbing the rows. She got to Weiss's level and came to her side as the hares looked at her strangely. What are you doing? Ruby hid behind the white-haired girl's back and cowered. Protect me. While the others looked at Ruby in confusion and Blake was leaning back in her seat, Naruto was laughing and scratching his nose proudly. How do you like that, Yang? Pretty awesome, am I right? He placed his hands on his hips and started stretching out his neck with a smirk. Yeah, if you think I was gonna be such an easy fight, then you were sorely mistaken. If you want to beat me, then you're gonna have to give it your... That was all he got out before the red-eyed demon landed a punch in his gut. Hunting. Meanwhile, Ospen peacefully filed out a set of forms and papers in his office as classical music played in the background. He enjoyed these moments of peace with just his thoughts and a cup of coffee to warm him over as he did his paperwork. Ospen sat up in his seat before continuing. Now, there have been an increasing need for huntsmen and huntresses outside the kingdoms. We need to stand a patrolling force and reconnaissance for... Thud! His entire room shook and quaked as the gears over his head creaked with the force of the sudden earthquake. Osman looked around silently as the room shook a little more before finally stopping. A splash! And his coffee mug tipped over and spilled all over his papers. Hunting. Meanwhile, now it was around this time that the first huntsmen started to emerge in remnants. They proved invaluable in the battle against the Grim and any other rogue force that rose at the time. Professor Oblick, Dr. Oblick, is this going to be on the exam? Of course it's going to be on the exam. The exam is a test of your cumulative knowledge of everything we've discussed in class. If there is something I am mentioning, thud. The room shook and the students felt their seats tumble beneath them as the coffee mug on Uble's desk tipped over the side and almost broke on the ground. But the twitchy doctor appeared by his desk and grabbed his mug before it hit the ground and caught his coffee before it splashed in the ground and stood tall before taking a quick swig of his drink and placed it back on the table. It will most likely be tested. Now, on the next major event. Hunting. Todd was sitting behind his desk and carefully cleaning his weapon with a gentle hand as he was reminded of all the old battles and grim they had slain over the years. Thud! The room shook with a sudden quake as he felt everything from the floorboards and ceiling shake. Luckily for him, he didn't have a cup of coffee to tip over to cause a mess. Unfortunately, one of the cages holding one of his captured Grim fell over and broke, letting the monster roam freely. The Barber Tusker looked over at the rotund man and let out a low growl. Now, Buster boy. And Portman stood out of his chair and held his battle axe over his shoulder. You'll get back in your cage like a good boy if you know what's good for you. Hunting. Shocked. That's the best word to explain what everyone was experiencing, and it was also the best word to express what they were showing too. Considering everyone watching had eyes as big and wide as plates. One moment, Naruto was showing an amazing set of skills and overwhelming Yang's strength and knocking her around. The next, his entire upper body was embedded in the wall with just his limp legs sticking out, and across the stage, Yang was breathing heavily with fire coming off her hair, and her light-like eyes changed into a pair of red gems. It must have hit really hard because the wire ripped and all of his swords were spread around the ground. Ruby sadly nodded her head. Yeah, that's how I thought it would go. Miss Xiaolong, what in the world are you doing? Glinda said as she came onto the stage and started furiously reprimanding the girl for her actions. She continued, one moment you were fighting and the next you. You seem to be overwhelmed with anger and punched Mr. Uzumaki into a wall. What do you have to say for yourself? Yang finished her panting and stood back up with narrowed eyes. She spoke almost in a growl. I really don't like it when people mess with my hair. Glinda just stared at her in disbelief, not being able to comprehend that as the logical reason for her sudden outburst and spike in strength. She looked over at Naruto's embedded form and looked down at her scroll to see that he had fallen into the last fourth of his aura meter. That was enough to constitute the end, so she announced, Due to the direction of how this match has changed, I hereby declare Yang Xiao. Everyone looked towards the wall to see Naruto's legs thrashing around and his muffled screams barely coming through the cracks. Glinda looked over at Yang as she just shrugged her shoulders in confusion, unable to understand his murmurs before the teacher asked him, What was that? I said... Crash! Naruto broke out of the concrete and the wall and rubble fell around him. He had just barely protected his head before he was sent flying into the wall, and there was a burning hole in the center of his clothes that revealed an aura of burnt flesh healing itself. Naruto glared and stood up before spitting out some blood. I said, not yet. Glinda looked between the injured blonde boy and the fiery blonde girl. She saw the focus on their eyes and the fact that they obviously weren't about to relinquish the fight just yet. She looked down at her scroll to see Naruto had regained up to a third of his aura, while Yang still had half, but her bar was slowly diminishing with the use of her semblance. Glinda decided not to interfere until absolutely necessary and stepped back off the stage. Naruto rubbed the blood off his chin before looking down at his feet to see the mess. He kneeled down and sheathed Stormer and most of Gatling's short blades until he only had one in each hand. He looked up and saw Yang's shoulders slowly heaving with her power and strength building up. Naruto shot 2 arrows as quickly as possible at Yang to test her new strength, and he got a clear answer when her hand shot up and caught the two collapsible before they ever hit her. She dropped them before lowering her arms and smirking at his challenge. He smiled in return before accepting the challenge. He dashed forward and threw the 2 blades at the busty boxer as she rushed forward and smacked them away without a second thought. They both dealt their right fist back before punching and slamming their fists together in a fiery explosion. Yang stumbled back, and Naruto's entire hand was covered in smoke before he pulled a short blade out and stabbed it into the cartridge chamber of her right gauntlet, stopping her shotgun blast from coming out again. Yang braced herself before jumping forward and ramming her shoulder into his chest, knocking him down and preparing to stomp on his head, but Naruto lifted himself up on his hand as her boot landed right by his head before he started spinning like a top and knocking her feet out from under her. She fell to his side and he attempted to hit her with his good hand before she blocked it and countered with another strike. Naruto used his shoulder to guard and then used his healing hand to pull out the sword lodged in her gauntlet before kicking her away and flipping back to his feet. Yang didn't wait another second before jumping back on her feet as Naruto's hand finally healed and he grabbed another short blade. They charged before Naruto jumped and did a spin kick at Yang's back. She ducked and let him fly over her before he landed and turned around to follow through. Yang fired around at her feet and propelled herself into Naruto and knocked him back with the force. She spun and rolled her fist back before Naruto ducked the quick throw of jabs just over his head. He tried to slash at her midriff, but she pushed the blade away from her stomach and struck Naruto across the cheek with her elbow. He spun and threw another blade at her head that she leaned away and dodged as it whistled past her ear. She was about to punch him while he was open before Naruto pulled the wire he had tied tightened around the blade and slammed its hilt into her back. He spun to the side to catch the blade and swung it upwards as the sword hit her chin and made her stumble back. Naruto then stepped in behind her and wrapped his arms around her stomach before pulling her up and slamming her into the ground with a German suplex. Yang barely noticed as her semblance had powered her up so much she had hardly felt the attack. She slammed her fist on the ground and created an explosion that blew Naruto away from her and along the stage. Naruto used the movement to flip to his feet and flicked a short blade into the ground close to Yang before pulling on the wire to vault him towards her. Yang guarded against his knee and skidded back before reeling her fist back to fire at him. But Naruto turned in the air and pulled out the knife in his right boot to expertly toss at the nozzle as it fired. Boom! Yang yelped and was blasted back from the premature explosion from her gauntlet. Naruto protected his eyes against the smoke before grinning. Good old stabby! Yang groaned for a moment before growling angrily and lifted herself back to her feet. She looked down at her right gauntlet to see there was a smoke still rising from where her slug had been blocked and used against her. She was panting slightly and looked up to see Naruto preparing to continue despite the fatigue starting to plague him. The two blondes narrowed their eyes before charging forwards, Yang feeling her good fist back as Naruto prepared to pull out Stormer. That's enough! The lights turned back on over the entire stage, and Naruto and Yang were so surprised by it that they had to put the brakes on their run and skidded towards each other. Naruto stumbled around as Yang looked around. Wait, what? What happened? That's it. The match is over, Glinda said as she started walking towards them to make sure they didn't proceed. The winner is settled. Yang and Naruto blinked in surprise before looking at each other in confusion. They looked up at the teacher one last time. So who won? Glinda didn't respond as she just pointed upwards at the glass screen for the two blondes to see for themselves. Naruto, which was just barely still in the green after all the hits he had taken. Yang had finally just dipped into the red. What? Yang yelled as her hair and eyes reverted to their natural state. She stumbled and she slumped her shoulders and moaned, Damn it, are you kidding? I was like one sliver away from whipping his butt. Can't we just keep going for a little bit longer? I'm sorry, Miss Xiaolong, but once a combatant has fallen into the red, that is the end of a sparring session. No exception. Ah. Yang pouted and slumped her shoulders. She then took notice of something in her gauntlet before she started to fiddle with it. Naruto just blinked in utter surprise that he had won the fight. He didn't know what to say before he heard claps and cheers coming from the stands all around him as his classmates applauded. Way to go, man. That was it. I want to try against you too. Naruto looked around in silent awe before his hand shot up in reflex and caught something tossed at his head. He looked down to see it was his hidden knife that Yang had pulled out from Ember Silica's chamber. She was checking her weapon over before walking up to the whiskered blonde and smiled. Well, I guess you win this round. I'll hand it to you. You were tougher than I thought. I guess that's what I get for underestimating you. Naruto smiled as he clicked his knife back into his boot. Well, if it's any consolation, you were just as strong and terrifying as I thought you'd be. I don't think I need to have another fight with you anytime soon. We'll see about that. The Yang raised her hand up and grinned. Sorry for blasting you in the chest like that. Naruto smiled and grabbed her hand in a tight grip. Sorry for cutting some of your hair. She pulled him in and whispered, threatening his ear. You're damn right, and if you do that again, you will not have a teacher or a bar to protect you, got it? Naruto's eyes shrunk in fear. Yeah, I got it. Good. She pulled back and patted his shoulders. Great fight, man. Yang was a weird girl. It must have run in the family. Linda walked up to her two students and started to critique them on their fight. You two showed splendid skill and ability during the fight, and you both showed that you excel in the field of relentlessness and durability. She looked around. If what you did to the stage can't be testament to that, I don't know what would. Naruto and Yang took a moment to look around at the result of their fighting. The ground had cracked and pieces of rubble sticking out of it with multiple scorch marks all over the stage. Also, there was the obvious problem of the hole in the wall generously made when Yang sent Naruto into it. They laughed nervously and Yang inquired, Do we have to reimburse you for all the damages? Not at all. Glinda held the scroll under her arm before waving her crop wand, and a purple light emanating from the tip. The rubble and debris started to gather around before fitting back perfectly into place and mending the cracks. After a moment, the stage was remodeled so perfectly you wouldn't have even expected that a no-holds battle just finished a moment ago. Yang blinked in surprise and whistled. Naruto looked around. Holy crap, that's a useful semblance. Thank you, but that is where I have some points of notice for you both. Glinda put her hand back under her arms before looking at Yang. Miss Xiaolong, understand having confidence in one's own strength, but underestimating your opponent's ability will lead to cockiness and overseeing desperation and potential. Also, you may wish to revise the attitude and approach you take to losing a few strands of hair. That reckless endangerment of yourself and everyone around you will no doubt hinder your team's safety out in the field. Yang looked off to the side and grumbled sadly about how she hated people messing with her hair. And Mr. Uzumaki, Naruto stood up straight when he felt the serious woman's eyes fall on her. Is there a reason you were using your aura passively and neglecting to activate your semblance? Yang looked at Naruto with a critical glare as she had been wondering the same thing. Naruto felt the looks and just smiled before scratching his cheek. Well, that was just how I used my ability the best. It's tough to get out of the habit. As hunters, we train to use our aura and semblance to the best of our abilities, for the sake of the people we promise to protect. Glinda fixed her glasses before giving him a calculating look. I know only a few people in our line of profession that choose to use their natural abilities like that as passively as you do, Mr. Uzumaki. Is there an actual reason you can give me to why you won't use those abilities? Naruto's smile slowly straightened into a line as he looked back into Glinda's serious stare. Yang suddenly felt very tense in the atmosphere. She looked at Naruto and waited for an answer before he just shook his head. If I want to protect people, then I don't need to use those abilities, and that's the end of it. Glinda gave a subtle nod. Very well, then I suppose that is all I can get out of this matter. She nodded to her students. Very well done, you two. You may return to your seats. Naruto and Yang nodded to the professor before walking off stage and towards the stairs. Naruto making sure to pick up his blades before leaving. They walked up the stairs before Yang inquired, okay, be honest, if you had used your aura and semblance, would you have won the fight quicker? Don't know. Naruto's answer immediately, as he obviously wanted to drop the subject entirely. Doesn't matter. I didn't, and I won't. Oh, come on. Anything that has to be restricted and forbidden like that has got to be awesome. I don't think so. Okay, hold on. Yang took a few extra steps to stand in front of him and stop their walk up the stairs. She asked, what's the big deal? You know semblances are a part of you, and they're supposed to help you fight. If you used yours to make yourself stronger, which would be pretty damn impressive considering how strong you are already, and you beat me, which I will deny ever saying if you bring it up, I bet you'd be one of the toughest guys this year. Naruto thought for a minute before looking up at the busty blonde. You feel almost unstoppable when you use your semblance, right? Like you have an edge no one can beat. Yang blinked and thought for a moment before she tried to remember the exhilarating feeling she had when her ability activated. She remembered how she felt empowered and gave a hissing nod. Oh yeah, I guess you're right about that. Well, imagine if you started using something like that without any control, and you put everyone on your team, even Ruby, at stake when you did. Would you keep doing it? Yang looked conflicted for a moment before lowering her head and shaking it. Naruto decided to end it there before Yang grabbed his shoulders and gave him a piece of advice. Look, I guess if that's really how you feel, then I can't change your mind, but don't just keep this to yourself. You should try talking to someone about it. Naruto thought for a second before a small smile came on his face. Like a personal therapist or something? Probably not that, she joked and tapped his forehead. I don't think you want anyone messing around in that head of yours, but there's bound to be someone you can talk with, someone to convince you that you're in control. Naruto was silent for a moment before smiling at the girl. Do you always give word of wisdom to the guy that beat you? Yang shrugged and continued up. Don't know. No one ever beat me, and I plan to make sure that doesn't happen again. Sure, we'll see about that. The two blondes came back into the stand where they had left their friends. Thank you for the meal. Nora cheered as she jumped out of her seat with a big smile. The blondes blinked in confusion. What? We bet on who would win and wagered snacks and meals on it. Blake answered for them. Half of us bet on Yang and the others bet on Naruto. Since Naruto won, we're out of a meal for the night. Weiss crossed her arms disappointedly. I can't believe you lost. Yang scowled. Well, next time when you get to fight him, we'll see how you handle it. My cookies! Ruby whimpered with tears forming in her eyes. My cookies! Kiba came up beside Naruto and patted him on the back roughly. Way to go, man! I get to eat like a greedy king for the rest of the night. Naruto glared at his partner lightly. You know I'm getting half of all of your winnings, right? That goes for all of you. We'll discuss that later. Everyone, we still have time in class for one more match, Glinda announced as she set the roster on random. The final combatants of the evening will be Miss Pura Nikos and Mr. Sasuke Uchiha. The group blinked, surprised before looking at the red-haired warrior and the raven-haired swordsman. They were all silent as they were still surprised by the pickup. Second round, all or nothing, Ruby announced hopefully as she pointed at Nora with a challenge. I'm getting my cookies back. You're on. End of chapter 13.